teller didn't flinch. The manager barely glanced up. From the moment she approached the counter, it was already decided. Too polished to be desperate, too composed to be taken seriously. Just another black woman with ambition mistaken for audacity. But behind the calm exterior was someone cataloging every insult, every sideways look, every unfortunately cloaked in corporate tone. What they didn't realize was that the woman they tried to erase was never there to beg. She was watching, calculating, waiting for the exact moment to turn their entire world inside out. What came next wasn't vengeance, it was a reckoning. If you're watching this, hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think is really happening and where you're tuning in from. This isn't the story you think it is, and it's only just begun. Elora Gaines stepped through the tall glass doors of Sterling National Bank with a practiced grace that came from years of running her own business. Her pressed blazer hugged her frame neatly, her shoes clicked with crisp certainty on the polished marble floor, and her briefcase was balanced in one hand. She moved with purpose, yet she could feel eyes on her the moment she entered. The reception desk clerk offered a plastic smile that faded as soon as she approached. "Appointment?" the woman asked flatly. "Yes, with Mr. Merrick." 10:30, Elora answered calmly. The receptionist gave a short nod, lifted the phone, and buzzed the manager's office. "She's here," she said, not using Elora's name. Less than a minute later, Clayton Merrick emerged from a frosted glass doorway. Tall, clean-cut, with a tailored suit and a smile that never reached his eyes. He walked up to Elora and gave her a once-over. "You're Ms. Gaines?" he asked, his voice steeped in disbelief. "Yes," she replied. "I'm here to discuss the business loan." His smirk widened. "Of course. Come with me." Elora followed him through the corridor lined with framed stock certificates and historic bank photos. The office, he led her into a spacious, cold in tone. Leather chairs, oak desk, and behind him, a city skyline visible through wall-to-wall glass. Elora took the seat offered, laying her briefcase on her lap. Clayton remained standing a moment too long, still eyeing her as if she didn't quite belong in that chair. "So," he finally said, settling in across from her, "what brings you to our little corner of finance?" Elora kept her tone cordial. "I'm the founder and CEO of Ember Systems. We've developed a financial platform that's gained traction with mid-sized retailers. We've hit 2 major growth milestones, and now I'm seeking a commercial loan to scale operations." She slid a well-organized folder across the desk. "These are the projections, client contracts, and audited financial statements." Clayton lifted the folder and opened it lazily. He flipped through a few pages, his eyebrows raising not at the numbers, but at the professional quality of materials. Still, his expression remained unmoved. "Startup loans," he said, tapping a paper, "can be tricky." Elora leaned forward slightly. "We've already surpassed early profitability benchmarks. Our revenue is steady, with contracts secured for the next 18 months. Clayton closed the folder with a sigh. "Yes, but profitability doesn't equal sustainability. And with the current climate, we have to be extremely selective." Elora wasn't deterred. "Understood. That's why I've provided documentation showing our debt-to-income ratio, expense controls, and the security we're offering." She pulled a USB drive from her folder and set it on the desk. More detailed financials and projections. Clayton didn't reach for it. He smiled coolly. "I've seen enough." Elora blinked. "Pardon." "Ms. Gaines," he said, folding his hands, "we've reviewed your application. We don't feel this is the right fit for our lending criteria." She sat straighter. "May I ask why?" "Your site lists commercial loans for emerging businesses. We meet every published benchmark." He gave a dismissive shrug. "Let's just say we're looking for something a little more traditional. Brick and mortar, solid collateral, legacy, leadership." His meaning hung in the air. Elora's heart pounded. She kept her voice measured. "I've built this company from the ground up. We're profitable. Our clients include major regional chains. What part of this doesn't say solid?" Clayton's smile thinned. "We're not a venture capital firm, Ms. Gaines. We don't take leaps of faith." Elora's throat tightened. She knew what this was. It wasn't about the business. It was about her. The way he'd looked at her the moment she walked in. The way he ignored the data. The way he'd barely listened. "I'm asking for consideration based on the strength of the business," she said quietly. Not a leap of faith. Clayton stood up. The bank's lobby buzzed with muted conversations and the click of expensive shoes on marble tile. Alora chose a chair near the window and waited. Minutes passed. 15 became 30. At 45 minutes, Alora stood and approached the desk again. "Excuse me, I had a 10 o'clock appointment with Mr. Merrick. Has he been delayed?" The receptionist looked at her screen, then at Alora, her voice dry. "He's finishing a meeting. Shouldn't be long." Alora returned to her seat, folding her hands over her folder. Around her, customers came and went, most of them white. All of them greeted warmly and ushered into offices with little delay. At exactly 51 minutes past her appointment, Clayton Merrick appeared at his office door, glanced at the waiting area, then waved her over without a greeting. Alora rose and followed him, noting how he didn't offer a handshake, didn't make eye contact, didn't even step aside to let her enter first. Once in his office, he motioned to the chair across from his desk. "Ms. Gaines," he said flatly, "you're back." Alora nodded. "I've updated my projections and added a new contract. I believe it strengthens the case for the loan." Clayton sighed, not bothering to hide his impatience. He leaned back, opened a file lazily, and scanned the first page before dropping it onto his desk with a soft thud. "Ms. Gaines," he said, voice low and dismissive, "we've already reviewed your file. Our decision hasn't changed." Alora blinked, sitting straighter. "But I have new materials, an extended contract, revised forecasts, improved credit lines. I've addressed every concern you raised." He raised a hand to cut her off. "It's not a matter of numbers. It's about trust. We don't invest in businesses that haven't demonstrated legacy or stability. You've got hustle, sure, but hustle isn't a foundation." Alora's face remained composed, but her jaw tightened. "Isn't that what small business loans are for? To support entrepreneurs trying to build something real?" Clayton smirked. "That's what microloans are for. Maybe try the Community Initiative downtown. They help people build themselves up." His tone lingered over people, like it meant something more. Alora's stomach twisted. She stood slowly, her voice steady. "I see. Thank you for your time." He didn't respond. She turned and exited the office, passing several customers seated along the hallway. As she reached the main lobby, she paused, trying to gather her breath. Behind her, Clayton's voice rang out from the open doorway. "Didn't know Vogue ran a homeless edition now," he said, chuckling to a colleague just loud enough for the words to travel. Alora froze. For a second, the room seemed to dim. Her ears rang with the sting of the insult, the crude reduction of her appearance and identity into something less than. She kept walking, head high, but her fingers gripped the handle of her briefcase like it might keep her upright. Outside the bank, the air was cool, but not refreshing. Her lungs burned. She reached her car, sat in the driver's seat, and closed the door. Only then did she allow the tremble to rise from her shoulders. She had been prepared for resistance, for caution, even skepticism. But not this. Not outright mockery. Not being treated as though she were unworthy of even being heard. She had spent years building her company, working nights, sacrificing weekends, and doing everything by the book. She had more than earned that loan. Yet she had been dismissed not because of her numbers or her strategy, but because of who she was and who she wasn't. She had learned to push forward no matter how clean the rejection or cruel the delivery. So she gathered her strength, recalibrated her presentation, added another signed contract from a high-traffic vendor, and resubmitted her application electronically through Sterling's online portal. She clicked send and leaned back, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The confirmation email hit her inbox within seconds. "Thank you for submitting your application. You will receive a response within 3 business days." She closed the laptop, but not the fight burning behind her eyes. 3 days passed, then 5. By the 7th day, Alora still hadn't heard a word. No email, no call, no status update on the bank's portal. She logged in again to check, only to find that there was no record of her application. Her name, her business, even the submission confirmation were gone, erased like they had never existed. Her breath caught. She blinked and refreshed the page. Still nothing. Panic and disbelief warred in her chest. She picked up the phone and dialed Sterling's main branch. "Sterling National, this is Shonda," came the voice of the same icy receptionist from her last visit. Alora kept her tone composed. "Hi, this is Alora Gaines. I submitted a commercial loan application last week and haven't received any updates. When I checked the portal, my submission was missing. Could you help me locate it?" A pause. "Hold, please." Classical music hummed on the line for what felt like an eternity. When Shonda returned, her voice had cooled several degrees. "I'm not seeing any application under your name. Did you complete all required fields?" Alora's spine stiffened. "Yes. I even received a confirmation email." "Can you forward that to us?" Alora did. She waited. 5 more minutes passed. Shonda's voice returned, hesitant. "Our system doesn't show any trace of that submission. It could be a technical issue, or maybe the file was flagged." "Flagged?" Alora asked, her tone dropping. "For what?" "Sometimes the system filters certain profiles for review. It happens, especially for businesses that don't align with our usual lending patterns." There was something in Shonda's pause, a reluctant honesty under the cold professionalism. Alora's breath hitched, and for a moment she couldn't find her voice. "Thank you," she said quietly, ending the call before anger betrayed her. She stared at the wall, heart pounding. She had been erased. Her submission had been deleted without cause, without notice, and no one was going to own up to it. The rage that simmered beneath the surface began to boil. She wasn't just being denied, she was being removed, silenced, erased from the system like she never existed. Later that day, she drove to another local bank, Riverview Commercial, hoping for a fresh start. The branch manager there, a young man named Curtis, seemed interested as she handed over her materials. He reviewed her proposal in silence, occasionally nodding. But just as he was about to say something, his office phone rang. He picked it up, listened quietly for a moment, then turned in his chair, his expression subtly changing. He ended the call and turned back to her, folding his hands. "Ms. Gaines," he said cautiously, "I'm going to need to run this through a secondary verification. Just standard procedure." "Of course," Alora replied, but her stomach twisted. Curtis walked her out with polite smiles, but she saw it in his eyes. Something had changed. An hour later, Alora received a call from a friend who worked in that same bank's regional processing office. "You didn't hear this from me," the friend warned, but Clayton Merrick called our branch. By morning, the resolve in her chest had solidified into something harder than anger: purpose. She returned to Sterling National Bank, not through the front entrance, but through the public records department connected to the side of the building. She had no intention of making a scene. Yet, she asked to speak with someone from the operations team under the pretext of verifying her business account details. After waiting nearly 20 minutes in a bland hallway that smelled faintly of printer ink and cheap cologne, a young man appeared. He looked barely 22, dressed in a button-down 2 sizes too large, with an ID badge that read Trent Holloway, Operation Support. He gave her a tentative smile and gestured for her to follow him to a cubicle. Once seated, Alora explained calmly that she had applied for a commercial loan and wanted to know if any internal notations had been made regarding her application or business profile. Trent, clearly new to the job, frowned and turned to his monitor. "Usually I can't share private entries," he said. "But if you're the client listed on the record, you should be able to request access to your file's history." He typed for a moment, then paused. "That's odd," he murmured. Alora leaned in slightly. "What?" Trent clicked rapidly through several windows, his brows furrowing. "There's a record of a loan application from your business. It was routed to underwriting, approved, then suddenly flagged and closed with no explanation." Alora's pulse surged. "Approved?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Trent nodded. "There's a notation from underwriting that reads, 'Strong financials. Recommend immediate funding.' Minimal risk. Dated 2 days before your rejection. He turned to her, now fully alert. That's not normal. That kind of override doesn't happen unless someone very high up interferes directly. He clicked a few more times, then hesitated. "You didn't hear this from me," he whispered, then turned the monitor slightly so she could see. There it was, her name, her business, the recommendation, and a final action entry tagged under Clayton Merrick's administrative ID. The timestamp showed it had been deleted manually 3 hours before her scheduled appointment. Alora swallowed hard. "Can I have a printout of that?" she asked. Trent glanced over his shoulder, then back at the screen. "If anyone asks, say you got it from client services." He printed the document, slid it across the desk, and lowered his voice. "This isn't the first time I've seen this happen. Usually, the files just disappear. Yours was sloppy. Someone tried to erase it, but underwriting logs are harder to wipe." Alora took the document, folded it slowly, and slipped it into her portfolio. "Thank you," she said, rising. Trent gave her a tight nod, eyes darting nervously around the room. Alora didn't hesitate. She walked straight through the operations wing, past the corridor, and into the main lobby of Sterling National. Clayton Merrick was seated behind his glass-walled office, laughing with 2 men in suits. The moment he saw her, his expression shifted from amusement to calculated neutrality. She walked directly to his door and opened it without knocking. "We need to talk," she said, voice sharp. His companions turned, startled. Clayton stood slowly. "MS. Gaines, I don't believe you have an appointment." "You erased my approved loan application," she snapped, pulling the printout from her folder and tossing it onto his desk. The 2 men stared at the document. Clayton barely glanced at it. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Underwriting approved my request," she continued. "You deleted the entry and flagged my name in the system." Clayton's expression didn't change. "We reserve the right to decline any application that doesn't meet our standards." Alora stepped forward. "Don't lie to me. This wasn't a rejection, it was sabotage. And you tried to erase the trail." Clayton looked to his guests, gave a theatrical sigh, then reached for his phone. "Security, please escort a non-client from the premises," he said smoothly, then turned back to her with a cold smile. "We don't tolerate threats or harassment." Alora blinked. "You're calling security on me?" He raised his brows. "You've disrupted business operations. Please leave." Moments later, 2 security guards entered the office. The video showed her calmly confronting Clayton, presenting the printout, and him casually calling for security. The camera captured the entire walk through the bank lobby, every turned head, every diverted gaze, every cold silence, as she was ushered out like a threat instead of a client. She paired it with a short message: approved, deleted, erased. Watch what happens when a black woman demands answers from a powerful bank executive. Within hours of posting, the clip caught fire. Twitter ignited with hashtags like #BankingWhileBlack and #JusticeForAlora. Comments flooded in from all directions: outrage, support, disbelief. Influencers reposted it. News blogs embedded it. Within 24 hours, the video had over 2 million views. And still, Alora said nothing else. She didn't grant interviews. She didn't go on camera. She let the footage speak for itself. On the second day, a local news station tracked her down for comment. She declined. "Let them see it," she said to her assistant. "Let them see what happens in daylight." Meanwhile, inside the walls of Sterling National Bank, Clayton Merrick scrolled through his phone with a faint smile. He watched the clip, read the tweets, and leaned back in his leather chair, unbothered. "Publicity," he said to his assistant, "is a disease. It flares up, then dies." The assistant, unsure whether to agree, nodded silently. Clayton stood and adjusted his tie. "She'll fade. They all do. Nobody cares by next week. We'll bury it with charity work and a press release about community reinvestment." He walked out of his office without another word. But while Clayton dismissed the storm, it was only growing stronger outside. Alora's inbox overflowed with messages. Hundreds of strangers, mostly women, many black, shared their own stories of financial discrimination. Entrepreneurs denied capital. professionals dismissed in lobbies. Families turned away for mortgages despite pristine records. But one message stopped Alora cold. The sender used a blank email address, signed only a friend who knows. The message read, "This isn't just about you. Clayton's done this before, multiple times. We buried the complaints. They were flagged, rerouted, and quietly closed. Internal policy calls them soft denials. You should look deeper." Attached to the message was a spreadsheet, partially redacted, likely exported from an internal database. It listed loan applications over the past year, and beside each entry, a reason code for denial. Alora quickly spotted a pattern. Names that leaned African American or Hispanic were overwhelmingly marked as risk flag or underwriting override. And many of the applicants had similar or even better credentials than hers. There were dozens of them, maybe more. Her breath caught as she realized she was not alone. She was part of a silent purge, an invisible wall built by people like Clayton who never had to explain why they erased someone's chance at growth. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard as she drafted a response to the anonymous tipster. "Can you prove where this came from?" she typed. Within minutes, a reply appeared. "I worked in compliance. I left because of what I saw. I can't speak out, but I can guide you. Start with Internal Memo C74B. It was sent last quarter to all managers." Alora clicked play, and the screen filled with Gerald's tired, lined face. His voice was calm but burdened. "My name is Gerald Marks. I worked in Sterling Bank's Central Compliance Unit for 14 years. I oversaw digital loan processing filters and regional reporting. What I saw during my last year there forced me to leave. There's an internal flagging mechanism tied to a scoring algorithm that supposedly helps assess risk potential among applicants. But what it actually does quietly and visibly is flag people with names statistically associated with Black or Latino heritage. The terms used in internal policy are vague, like cultural profile or non-standard asset reporting. It's dressed in neutral language, but make no mistake, it is racial profiling by code. Alora's breath hitched as she watched him hold up redacted copies of the internal documents. One showed an email chain referencing regional adjustments based on demographic variance, and a recommendation to tighten first-look filters on less established applicants with cultural volatility factors. Alora felt her heart rate climb. The language was engineered to sound technical, but it was obvious once you knew what to look for. Her name had never stood a chance. The story exploded. By midday, national outlets had picked up the footage. Morning shows featured panels dissecting the implications of algorithmic discrimination. Financial experts debated whether Sterling acted alone or reflected a wider industry pattern. Civil rights lawyers gave interviews calling for audits and accountability. The pressure grew so intense that by that afternoon, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, under the U.S. Treasury, launched a formal inquiry. Alora watched from her apartment as a convoy of federal inspectors arrived at Sterling's flagship branch, Clayton's branch, with press vans trailing behind. Clayton, ever defiant, was already standing outside with a smug grin and a microphone pinned to his lapel. He was giving a live statement, one hand casually resting in his pocket. "I want to make something perfectly clear," he said into the sea of cameras. Sterling National Bank follows all state and federal regulations. These allegations are baseless and exaggerated. We don't deny loans because of who people are. We deny loans based on risk. That's what any responsible institution does. I've built this branch from the ground up. This is just noise." His voice oozed confidence. "We're cooperating with regulators, but we have nothing to hide. Algorithms don't discriminate. People's choices do." Alora's blood boiled. He had the audacity to frame himself as the victim of a witch hunt, to act as if the overwhelming proof was meaningless. She turned off the television and returned to her laptop. If the regulators were digging, she needed to be ready. She found Memo C74B. It had been archived online by an anonymous contributor on a banking whistleblower forum. The memo's contents were shocking. Dressed as a routine optimization directive, it instructed all regional managers to adopt a new tiered applicant review model, that favored legacy clients and pattern-aligned enterprises. One clause noted that discretionary override authority had been expanded to branch managers to allow pre-screened declinations for non-aligned applicants, particularly those lacking intergenerational assets. Alora knew what that meant. Businesses like hers, founded by first-generation entrepreneurs, often women of color, were being denied before the paperwork even reached underwriting. The memo was signed by a senior VP who had retired only months ago. With that document, the anonymous spreadsheet, and the footage from her own experience, Alora compiled a full report and sent it to the investigative unit at the Treasury. 2 hours later, a federal agent reached out directly. "We're moving forward with a broader audit. What you've shared confirms multiple red flags." Alora agreed to a private debriefing. Over the next several days, she watched as Clayton's kingdom began to strain. Staff at Sterling's main branch were pulled into interviews. Internal emails were subpoenaed. Executives released statements defending the integrity of their systems while carefully distancing themselves from Clayton. Social media didn't relent either. Former employees began speaking out, and more stories surfaced of suspicious denials and muted protests. And through it all, Clayton continued to speak to the press as if he were untouchable. He gave interviews on business news networks, praising his leadership and denouncing cancel culture attacks against high-performing branches. He even claimed Alora was staging a stunt for political reasons. "This is a PR smear," he said during one interview. People speculated she had gone underground or that she had been advised to stay silent while legal action was pending. What they didn't know, what no one outside a select circle of officials knew, was that Alora Gaines wasn't just a fintech entrepreneur fighting for a loan. She was something far more prepared, far more dangerous to men like Clayton Merrick. On a rainy Thursday morning, a press conference was announced without warning at the headquarters of the Civil Financial Equity Alliance, a nonprofit known for exposing discriminatory banking practices. Reporters rushed to the scene, expecting a statement from the organization's spokesperson. Instead, the person who stepped onto the stage, calm and composed in a charcoal gray blazer and blue silk blouse, was Alora Gaines. Cameras clicked. Journalists leaned forward. Alora approached the podium with measured grace and spoke into the cluster of microphones. "For those of you who don't know me," she began, her voice steady and clear, "my name is Dr. Alora Gaines. I hold a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School. I'm a financial attorney, systemic equity strategist, and co-founder of the Civil Financial Equity Alliance. I'm not just an entrepreneur, I'm an investigator." The room fell dead silent. "For the past 14 months, she continued, I've been working undercover with the Department of the Treasury and the Office of Civil Rights to monitor and expose discriminatory lending behavior in mid-tier financial institutions, particularly those masking their prejudice through algorithmic manipulation and internal override policies." She paused as the words settled over the audience like a hammer. Sterling National Bank was one of 10 institutions flagged in our initial audit. My application and interaction with Mr. Clayton Merrick were not just personal, they were operational. A wave of gasps rolled across the room. Cameras zoomed closer. She raised a folder filled with documents. "We documented systemic bias, pattern profiling, and false justifications for rejections based on subjective discretion. The evidence from Sterling has become a cornerstone in the task force's efforts." She looked directly into one of the cameras. "What happened to me at that bank was real, but it was also expected. Mr. Merrick's behavior, his manipulation of internal systems, his lies, were not anomalies. They were the point." Reporters began shouting questions, but Alora held up a hand. "I know you have many questions, and we will address them. But for now, I want to speak to the people who saw my video, who messaged me, who shared their own stories of financial injustice. You were not imagining things. The system is rigged in ways you cannot see, but that's changing now." The press conference continued with officials from the Treasury and the Department of Justice confirming Alora's undercover role and detailing the scope of the investigation. Sterling was not the only institution implicated, but it had become the focal point due to Clayton's arrogant defiance and Alora's high-profile case. Back at the bank, When news of the press conference broke, chaos erupted. Clayton, who had just wrapped up another smug interview outside his branch, was caught off guard when a reporter shoved a phone in front of him. On the screen, Alora's face stared back, framed by the headline. Dr. Alora Gaines exposes Sterling Bank in undercover discrimination sting. Clayton's smile faltered. This is manipulation, he stammered. She lied about who she was. That's entrapment. But the cameras were already turning away from him. The tide had shifted. No longer was Alora the nameless woman escorted from a bank lobby. She was now the face of financial justice, armed with credentials, allies in high places, and incontrovertible proof. Alora returned to her office that evening, exhausted but unwavering. She knew this wasn't over. In the days following Alora's revelation, the financial world buzzed with speculation and reckoning. Major news networks replayed the clip of her standing behind the podium with the calm of someone who'd waited years to speak the truth. Social media, once aflame with outrage, now surged with vindication and analysis. Every panel show dissected her strategy, her credentials, and most importantly, the scale of what she had exposed. But Alora, or rather Dr. Alora Gaines, had more to reveal. The Civil Financial Equity Alliance wasn't just a nonprofit watchdog. It had been quietly collaborating with a task force initiated by the Department of Justice, targeting discriminatory patterns in financial institutions across the country. In the next televised press briefing, Alora stood beside U.S. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Thorne as it was officially announced that she had served as a senior operative within the task force. Dr. Gaines was selected not only for her academic and legal credentials, but for her lived experience as a Black businesswoman navigating systemic exclusion, Thorne said. Her work has been instrumental in triggering several high-level investigations. The briefing concluded with a federal directive known as Financial Integrity Order 49A, which required all banks operating under federal charter to undergo immediate algorithmic and discretionary loan audits. The order carried an unexpected and unprecedented clause. All active personnel listed as named subjects in ongoing investigations would be flagged in real time within their institution's internal systems. That meant one thing: Alora's name, her operational case number, and her federal designation would appear across Sterling Bank's internal platforms, including the terminals Clayton Merrick and his staff used every day. And it did. On a Monday morning, just before opening hours, staff at Sterling's main branch logged in and were greeted with a flashing red compliance alert. Across every screen, a profile appeared bearing the name: Gaines, Alora M., DOJ Task Force Operative. Classification: Federal Witness. Priority: High. Access status: Sealed. Managers froze mid-keystroke. Compliance officers stared in disbelief. Even Clayton's personal dashboard, a portal he thought invulnerable, flashed with a compliance override that locked his manual override access. He stormed into the IT director's office demanding answers, only to find the department already surrounded by Treasury agents conducting a software sweep. "What the hell is this?" Clayton demanded. The lead compliance investigator, calm and unreadable, responded, "It means you've been interacting with a federal operative under surveillance protocols. Any attempt to modify or erase this entry will be considered obstruction." Clayton's jaw twitched. "This is outrageous. This is entrapment." "No," the agent replied coolly. "This is accountability." Clayton returned to his office in silence, locking the door behind him as the weight of the situation began to settle across his shoulders. He tried to call regional headquarters, but every line routed to voicemail. His emails bounced back with automatic disclaimers noting legal lockdown status. The walls were closing in. Meanwhile, Alora received notice that 3 more financial institutions had preemptively opened internal investigations into their own practices, hoping to avoid the fallout Sterling faced. She didn't gloat. She didn't even celebrate. Instead, she reviewed the growing file being compiled by federal attorneys that now included her digital correspondence, audio recordings, and the testimonies of other employees who had come forward since the scandal broke. One of them, a former Sterling underwriter, submitted a written account of how Clayton had bragged about turning down minority applicants to maintain the brand image. He had even used the phrase, "We're not the melting pot, we're the gold standard," in a management meeting, drawing laughter from some, discomfort from others. Those who voiced concern had been reassigned or pushed out within months. Alora included this account in her final summary to the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. She knew the mountain of evidence would be more than enough. Back at the bank, tensions hit a boiling point. Clients began pulling their accounts. Investors issued public statements condemning Sterling's leadership. Clayton, now under suspension pending investigation, was escorted out of the building by federal agents while reporters filmed from the sidewalk. His face, once smug and untouchable, now flickered with disbelief and sweat. That night, every major financial paper ran the same headline in bold across their front pages: "Federal operative exposes racial profiling scheme inside top bank." And beneath it, the subhead: "Dr. Alora Gaines's name now embedded in national compliance systems as part of sweeping reform effort." But for Alora, it wasn't about recognition or revenge. It was about breaking the silence that had protected people like Clayton for far too long. As she prepared her final report for congressional review, she thought of every small business owner who had been denied for reasons that had nothing to do with risk and everything to do with race. She had opened a door. Now it was up to others to walk through it. The morning after Sterling Bank's internal systems were flagged with Alora Gaines's DOJ operative profile, the financial institution found itself in full meltdown. By the time most branches opened across the country, panic had already spread among upper management and shareholders. Compliance alerts triggered an immediate freeze on all manual overrides and discretionary loan rejections. Internal audits, previously confined to Clayton Merrick's branch, expanded company-wide. Sterling's legal team issued a statement that attempted to separate the actions of one manager acting independently from the bank's official policies. But no one bought it. Alora's documentation, whistleblower files, and a series of leaked memos indicated that the problem was systemic. Clayton, meanwhile, awoke in a cold sweat at his suburban estate in Ridgefield. He had spent the night pacing between news channels, watching his career implode. His personal assistant quit via text. The board hadn't called. His inbox was flooded with media inquiries and legal threats. His face, once a symbol of polished authority, had become a meme symbolizing financial injustice. At 7:46 a.m., 3 unmarked vehicles pulled up outside his home. Clayton looked out the window and felt the air leave his lungs. A team of federal agents exited the vehicles, jackets marked with the insignia of the DOJ's Civil Rights Division and the Office of Financial Enforcement. He barely had time to put on a shirt before they knocked. "Mr. Merrick," the lead agent announced, "you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, falsification of financial documents, conspiracy to deny federally protected lending rights, and violations under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act." Clayton tried to speak, but choked on his own words. He was handcuffed on his doorstep, the press already gathering at the end of a cul-de-sac. He was read his rights as cameras flashed. He looked dazed, his arrogance gone, replaced by disbelief. The arrest was broadcast live within the hour. Alora watched it from her office, expression unreadable. She felt no triumph, just clarity. This was what accountability looked like when truth was armed with evidence. Following Clayton's arrest, federal agencies issued a temporary freeze on his personal and business assets. Investigators believed he had received undisclosed bonuses for meeting branch efficiency goals, which were tied to his high rate of loan denials, specifically those deemed non-aligned applicants. Bank regulators poured through years of loan activity, uncovering irregular patterns and backdated file deletions. Clayton's records showed a deliberate strategy to funnel high-risk rejections toward minority applicants while fast-tracking approvals for legacy clients with weaker financials. Meanwhile, Sterling Bank's leadership scrambled to salvage what little credibility remained. Their stock began to plummet. Institutional investors rapidly pulled out. Several state governments suspended Sterling's contracts for public sector payroll and municipal bonds. In less than 72 hours, the bank lost nearly 30% of its market value. Shareholders demanded resignations. Branch managers across the country fielded calls from panicked clients. Customers stood in lines to close accounts, their faces grim with disgust. Allura, now the face of the investigation, received messages from across the nation. Attorneys reached out to file class action lawsuits on behalf of minority applicants who had been denied loans without explanation. Financial blogs posted aggregated data showing that Sterling had one of the lowest approval rates for Black and Latino business owners among all major banks over the past decade. Civil rights organizations began mobilizing. Within a week, the first class action lawsuit was filed in federal court by a coalition of small business owners, led by a former nurse who had been denied funding to open a clinic in her own underserved neighborhood. Her story echoed Allura's in nearly every detail. In total, 4 lawsuits were filed within 10 days, targeting Sterling's leadership, Clayton personally, and the bank's compliance oversight mechanisms. Each lawsuit included detailed examples of discriminatory practices, supported by data from Allura's investigation and the now public whistleblower accounts. In the financial industry, Sterling Bank's name became synonymous with institutional prejudice. Other banks quietly initiated internal audits to avoid becoming the next target. A new wave of fintech platforms began marketing themselves as bias-free alternatives, and lawmakers started drafting bills to regulate discretionary lending authority more tightly. Allura's impact rippled far beyond one bank. She had ignited a movement that forced an entire sector to look at its darkest corners. And while Clayton's mugshot circulated online, accompanied by headlines like "From Boardroom to Booking," Allura remained focused. She met with DOJ officials to ensure that reforms would not stop with a single arrest or a handful of lawsuits. She urged lawmakers to mandate transparency in algorithmic lending, to protect whistleblowers, and to create permanent oversight panels for financial discrimination. She refused to let the moment become a mere scandal. She was determined to make it a turning point. The courtroom was packed, though no trial was underway. Clayton Merrick sat at the witness table, hands folded tightly, a pale blue suit draping a frame that had once exuded power but now seemed worn thin. The hearing was public, broadcast on national television, called by the Senate Subcommittee on Financial Ethics and Equity to explore the sweeping fallout of the Sterling Bank scandal. Dozens of similar hearings had occurred in the past, but this one was different. This one had a face, a name, and a moment that had shaken the conscience of the industry. The man seated before the committee had once believed himself untouchable, but now he waited, his voice steadier than expected, as the chairman gave him the floor. Clayton cleared his throat and looked up. The camera zoomed in. "I never thought I'd be sitting here," he began, voice low. "But I'm not here to protect myself. I'm here because I need to be honest for the first time in a very long time." He paused, exhaled. "I believed I was protecting the integrity of the bank. That's what I told myself. I looked at numbers, at market trends, and at legacy profiles, and I convinced myself that risk lived in certain kinds of applications. But the truth is, I looked at people like Allura Gaines and saw something I didn't trust. Not because of their numbers, because of their names, their faces." The room went silent. No one told me to do it. There was no memo that said discriminate, but the system is built in such a way that you don't need those instructions. It's implied, it's enabled, and I followed it. He looked down for a moment, then back up. I destroyed opportunities for dozens, maybe hundreds of people. People who had dreams, who were qualified, who could have built something meaningful. I told myself it was business. It was never just business. It was personal. I failed. The committee chair let the silence hang for a beat before nodding. "Mr. Merrick, you've agreed to assist the committee in drafting legislation. Can you explain why?" Clayton gave a weary nod. "Because I need to make this mean something. I can't undo what I did, but I can help make sure the next generation of bankers doesn't repeat it. I'll answer every question, give every detail, name every policy that let this happen. Not because it redeems me, but because it's the right thing. Elsewhere, in a quiet room lined with books and quiet purpose, Elora watched the hearing on a large monitor. She sat alone, her expression calm but not indifferent. Every word Clayton spoke carried the weight of delayed reckoning, but she didn't hear it as a victory. She heard it as a step, one in a long, uphill journey. She didn't feel satisfaction watching the man who once humiliated her bow his head in front of Congress. What she felt was responsibility to the countless applicants whose names had never been recorded, whose files had never been recovered, responsibility to the people still afraid to walk into a bank and be taken seriously. After the hearing, journalists reached out to Elora, asking for a statement. She issued a single sentence: "This is not the end. This is the opening of a door we cannot allow to close." That door would stay open. Within 6 months of the Sterling hearings, new legislation was introduced, the Fair Access and Lending Integrity Act. The bill proposed mandatory third-party audits of algorithmic lending systems, severe penalties for discretionary overrides without documentation, whistleblower protections, and real-time transparency for applicants to track the status of their submissions. Banks fought back. Lobbyists swarmed Washington. But public sentiment was strong, bolstered by Elora's composure and Clayton's startling testimony. When the bill passed the Senate with bipartisan support, it was Elora who was invited to stand beside the president as he signed it into law. She declined the spotlight and instead nominated 3 minority small business owners to attend in her place. Their presence sent a louder message than any speech ever could. Meanwhile, Sterling Bank underwent a forced restructuring. Several executives resigned. The board was dissolved and replaced under federal supervision. New hiring practices, community advisory panels, and full transparency dashboards became mandatory. And at the center of it all, the name Elora Gaines continued to symbolize the turning point, not just for banking, but for how the country viewed access, equity, and justice. Elora herself returned quietly to her organization. She didn't cash in on her fame or turn her role into a brand. Instead, she expanded the Civil Financial Equity Alliance, mentoring younger attorneys, training data analysts in bias detection, and continuing to push for reform wherever she saw injustice hiding in paperwork and jargon. In her heart, she knew this fight wasn't finished. Racism didn't vanish with policy, and justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just the simple act of making sure one more person walked into a bank and walked out with the opportunity they deserved. One evening, months after the law had passed and the headlines had faded, Elora received a letter. It was handwritten, the script careful and slightly uneven. It was from Clayton. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote, "but I want you to know I am working in a community finance clinic now, helping people I once turned away. I see them now. I listen. It's not redemption, but it's a start. Thank you for making me see." Elora folded the letter slowly, placed it in a drawer, and whispered to herself, "Then don't stop." And with that, she turned back to her work, knowing the system would never change on its own. It needed people willing to confront it, challenge it, and rewrite it. She was one of those people. She always had been. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful narratives like this, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps support the work and bring these stories to life. I'd love to know what you thought about the plot. Did any part of Elora's journey resonate with you? Were you surprised by Clayton's transformation in the end? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what you'd like to see in the next story. Your feedback fuels the next twist.